Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We love to go deep on these fascinating topics. And today we're going to be exploring something that could really change the way you think about retirement. And that is the idea of a tax-free retirement. So not just, the traditional tax-deferred, but completely tax-free. We've got some really interesting source material for today's deep dive. And I'm really excited to jump in and share some of the key insights and takeaways.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. I think a lot of people, when they think about retirement planning, they think 401k, they think IRA, and maybe they think Roth IRA. But as you said, we're going to kind of explore how to really get to that 0% tax bracket in retirement and maybe some things that folks haven't considered before.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that really struck me when I was looking through this material was an anecdote about the 2008 market crash and how so many investors panicked and sold off their assets when the market dipped and they ended up missing out on that rebound that followed.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic example of how emotions can really derail even the best laid financial plans. Fear and uncertainty can lead to impulsive decisions that end up eroding your long-term growth. And this is where this roadmap that's outlined in the source material really comes into play. This tax-free roadmap emphasizes having a personalized schedule for shifting assets into those tax-advantaged accounts.
Okay, so how does this tax-free roadmap differ from, the traditional advice that we're all kind of used to hearing?
I think it's a significant shift in mindset. It's about recognizing that minimizing your tax burden in retirement is just as crucial as growing your assets, and often requires a different type of expertise than what you might find with a traditional financial advisor.
So even if I have a financial advisor, they might not be the right person to guide me on this tax-free path.
It's not a guarantee. A lot of advisors are very much entrenched in the tax-deferred approach, which might not be the most advantageous route to a truly tax-free retirement. And the source material really advocates for seeking out a specialist in this area, someone who is trained, specifically in these tax-free retirement strategies.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. The source material mentions 3 financial buckets that are key to this strategy. Can you kind of break those down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with the taxable bucket. This is your readily available funds, for everyday expenses and emergencies. Ideally, it holds about 6 months' worth of income. However, the source does caution against overfunding this bucket. They give an example of a scenario where someone had a $200,000 balance when it should have been closer to $50,000.
Wow, so there is such a thing as having too much cash on hand.
Exactly right.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, if you have too much in that taxable account, it's not really working as hard for you as it could in a tax-advantaged environment.
Okay, so it's all about placement.
Strategic placement, yes.
Yeah. All right, what about the second bucket?
The second is your tax-deferred bucket.
Mm-hmm.
This is where your traditional retirement savings reside, your 401k, your IRAs. While these accounts offer tax advantages during the accumulation phase, the source warns that excessive growth here can actually backfire in retirement.
Backfire? How? So I thought the whole point of these accounts was to shelter money from taxes.
Well, it is, but remember, you eventually have to take distributions from these accounts, and when you do, those withdrawals are taxed as ordinary income. So if your tax-deferred accounts have grown significantly, you might find yourself pushed into a higher tax bracket when you start taking those distributions.
So it's like a ticking time bomb of taxes?
Kind of, yeah.
So what's the solution? How do you avoid that?
Well, that brings us to the third bucket, the tax-free bucket. This is where the magic really happens. These are accounts that grow and distribute funds completely tax-free, so think Roth IRAs. And then specially designed life insurance policies, which are often referred to as LILRPs.
So it's all about shifting as much as possible into that tax-free bucket. But how do you determine how much should be in each bucket?
Well, that's where the planning and the guidance come in. The source material highlights a few crucial questions to ask yourself. Like, what will your standard deduction be in retirement? Are you contributing above and beyond your retirement plan match? What are your projected rates of return? Do you have a pension? There are a lot of variables to consider.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot to juggle.
It can be, and that's why this is where that tax-free planning specialist really comes in. They can analyze your situation, project your future needs, and create that roadmap for you.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Absolutely. Not everyone is different. Different goals, different risk tolerance.
Right. So can you give us some examples of the types of decisions that this tax-free planning specialist would help me make?
Sure. So they would guide you through a series of considerations related to each bucket. For example, within that tax-free bucket, they would help you determine which options align best with your circumstances. Does a Roth IRA make sense for you? Are you eligible for the non-deductible IRA conversion strategy? What about a layer RP?
Non-deductible IRA conversion strategy. Now, that one sounds interesting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is a way to bypass those income restrictions that are associated with Roth IRAs. So you contribute to a traditional IRA with after-tax dollars, meaning you don't get an upfront tax deduction, but then you convert that traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, essentially bypassing those income restrictions.
Oh, so it's like a workaround.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing it's not quite as simple as it sounds.
Well, you're right to be cautious. There can be some tax implications depending on your situation. You might incur some taxes during the conversion process. So working with a specialist is crucial here.
Okay, so it's not a move to make lightly. You need to understand the tax consequences. Now, the source material also talks about something that I think a lot of people overlook, and that's the issue of Social Security taxation in retirement. A lot of folks don't realize that a portion of their benefits could actually be subject to taxes.
Yeah, that's a very common blind spot, and it can have a significant impact on your retirement income. The source material claims that drawing down taxable accounts to make up for those taxed Social Security benefits could deplete your savings 5 to 7 years faster.
Wow, that's a scary thought.
It is, yeah.
So how do you avoid falling into that trap?
Well, it comes down to a balancing act.
Yeah.
You want to leverage those tax-free distributions
Yeah.
from your Roth IRAs and LRPs to cover your expenses, but you don't want to push your income level above those Social Security taxation thresholds.
Okay, so it's like another layer of complexity to factor in.
Right, and that's where that specialist can really guide you.
Now, we've been talking a lot about low LPs. It seems like they play a significant role in this whole tax-free bucket.
They do.
So what makes them so special?
Yeah.
And how do I choose the right one?
LRPs offer a unique combination of tax advantages and growth potential when it comes to retirement planning. The key is that they allow for tax-free growth and distribution of funds. And the source material actually claims that there are over 300 companies out there offering LRPs. So having a specialist to help you sort through all those options is incredibly helpful.
So choosing a low LP is not something to be taken lightly.
No.
What are some of the key things I should be looking at?
So the source highlights a few essential attributes. First, you want to prioritize low expenses. You don't want to lose a big chunk of your returns to fees. Secondly, look for long-term care provisions. This can give you peace of mind knowing you have a safety net should you need long-term care services later in life.
Okay, those both sound important. Anything else?
You also want to make sure that the provider offers cost-free distribution so you can access your funds without unnecessary charges. And then last but certainly not least, financial stability is paramount.
Yeah.
You want to choose a provider with a solid track record, strong financial foundation to ensure the security of your investment.
That makes sense. I wouldn't want to put my money with some fly-by-night operation.
Right.
So once I've chosen a provider, what's next?
Well, then you need to make sure that the LRP is structured correctly to maximize your returns.
Yeah.
And we can delve into that a little bit more after a quick break.
Sounds good. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back to dive deeper into LRPs and the best ways to structure them. Stay with us.
All right, so we're back and ready to dig a little deeper into LRPs and how to structure them effectively.
Yep. It's not just picking a policy and hoping for the best.
Right, so the source material talks about this strategy of minimizing the insurance aspect of the LRP while maximizing those allowed contributions. And that seems a little counterintuitive to me. I mean, aren't you paying for life insurance within a LRP, so why would you want to minimize that?
Well, remember, the primary goal here is building that tax-free nest egg for retirement. The life insurance is there to, meet certain needs, but it shouldn't overshadow that growth objective. So by minimizing those insurance costs, you're freeing up more of your contributions to grow tax-free within the LRP. Okay, but some might argue that, by minimizing that insurance aspect, you're kind of defeating the purpose of having life insurance in the first place.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And it really highlights why it's so important to work with a knowledgeable specialist, someone who can help you strike that right balance between, maximizing growth, but also ensuring you have that adequate insurance coverage based on your individual needs.
Got it. So it's about tailoring the LRP structure to your specific goals.
Exactly.
Now, the source material mentions that this approach, minimizing insurance costs and maximizing contributions, can actually keep expenses relative to growth pretty low, around 1.5% annually over the life of the program.
Yeah, keeping those expenses in check is key. You want to make sure your money is working efficiently.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about LRPs, but what about those other tax-free options we touched on earlier? Roth IRAs, the non-deductible IRA conversion. How do those fit into this picture?
Well, think of it as diversifying your tax-free portfolio. Each tool has its place. And the best approach? often involves a combination of strategies.
Okay, so can you walk us through some of the key differences between a Roth IRA and that non-deductible IRA conversion?
Sure, so Roth IRAs, they're fantastic for tax-free growth and distributions, but they come with contribution limits and income restrictions. Not everyone qualifies. And that's where that non-deductible IRA conversion strategy comes in.
So it's kind of like a workaround for those income restrictions.
Exactly. You contribute to a traditional IRA
Yeah.
with after-tax dollars, so no upfront deduction, but then you convert it to a Roth, essentially bypassing those restrictions.
Sounds clever, but I'm sure there are some catches.
Well, you're right. To be cautious, there's some tax implications. You might incur some taxes during the conversion. So again, working with a tax professional is key.
So not something to jump into without doing your homework.
Right.
Now, we talked about how important it is to consider Social Security taxation in retirement. Can you remind our listeners why that's such a big deal?
Yeah, so a portion of your Social Security benefits could be subject to taxes depending on your income level. And this can really have a domino effect, forcing you to tap into those taxable accounts earlier, which we know can really erode your savings over time.
Right. The source material said it could shorten your retirement runway by 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought.
It is.
Yeah.
So how do you avoid that trap?
It's about strategic income management in retirement. Utilizing those tax-free distributions from your Roth IRAs, your ULRPs, to cover expenses, but without pushing yourself over those Social Security tax thresholds.
Another balancing act.
It is.
It seems like this whole approach to tax-free retirement planning just involves a lot of strategic maneuvering.
It does. It requires some careful thought, and that's why having a specialist in your corner can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got our 3 buckets: taxable, tax-deferred, and tax-free. We've got our tax-advantaged accounts like Roth IRAs and LRPs, and that overarching goal of minimizing our tax burden in retirement through strategic asset shifting and income management. Anything else we need to add to this mix?
Well, the source material did briefly mention another strategy called a 72T distribution, but it didn't go into a whole lot of detail, so maybe that's something we could explore a little bit further.
That sounds like a great topic for our next segment. So we're going to take a quick moment to let all this information sink in, and then we'll come back and unravel the mysteries of the 72T distribution. Okay, so let's dive into this 72T distribution you mentioned. It sounds like a way to maybe tap into those retirement funds a little early.
Yeah, it can be a helpful tool in certain cases.
Yeah.
A 72T distribution, also called a substantially equal periodic payment, allows you to withdraw from your tax-deferred accounts like a 401k or a traditional IRA before the age of 59 and a half without that 10% penalty.
Okay, that sounds almost too good to be true, so I'm sure there are some catches. What's the fine print?
Well, the IRS has some rules in place.
Mm-hmm.
Your distributions have to follow a specific structure. To qualify, these payments got to be substantially equal and taken over at least 5 years, or until you reach 59 and a half, whichever's longer.
So you can't just take out a lump sum.
Right. It's got to be structured, and there are different calculation methods you can use to determine those payment amounts, so it can get a bit complex. Working with a tax advisor is crucial here.
Now, aside from the rules, are there any downsides to using this strategy, things people should consider?
Yeah, one potential drawback is that once you start taking those 72T distributions, you're generally locked into that schedule for the full 5 years or until you're 59 and a half. There's not a lot of flexibility to change the amount or stop those distributions.
That's a good point. So it's not a decision to be made lightly. You really need to think it through.
Exactly.
And another thing to consider is that even though you avoid that 10% penalty with the 72T,
You still have to pay ordinary income tax on those distributions.
right, so it's not entirely tax-free.
It's tax deferred. So you're delaying the tax, not eliminating it.
I see. So it sounds like a 72T distribution could be a good tool in some situations, but it's not a magic bullet.
Right. It's best to consider it as part of a larger retirement plan,
Yeah.
working in tandem with those other tax-free strategies we've been talking about.
Right. It's all about having that well-rounded approach.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot about these different tax-free strategies. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that finding a qualified specialist is really key to making this all work.
Absolutely. They can help you navigate those complexities and create a plan that really suits your needs.
And as the source material suggests, a good place to start is by reaching out to the advisor who shared this book with you in the first place.
Yep, it's a good sign that they're at least somewhat familiar with these principles.
So folks, if you're intrigued by this idea of a tax-free retirement, don't be afraid to start that conversation.
All right, ask those questions. See if they align with your vision.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of tax-free retirement planning. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little inspiring. Remember, it's never too early to start planning for a future where you can enjoy your hard-earned money without the burden of taxes. Until next time, happy planning, everyone.